is a woman who writes books, and she's been fascinated with scars. She says that everybody has scars, physical, emotional, mental, and they all tell something about that person, especially the physical scars if we have them on our heads or the rest of our bodies. She wrote a book called Scars of Hope, and she spoke about different people's scars and what she found out about life in asking them about them. In the very last episode, the very last chapter of her book, Scars of Hope, she didn't realize, but one of her friends, a 30-year-old woman, very athletic, in the prime of her life, she discovered one day as they were playing tennis that her friend began to complain about how sore and swollen her knees were. So they sat down for a while. Of course, she was wearing these tennis braces over her knees. And so you know what these tennis braces, they open up to the kneecap. There's a big opening to the kneecap, and she noticed on one of her knees a huge scar. And of course, then she began to ask, "Where did you get that scar?" She said, "Well, do you have something happen to you?" She said, "Well, I got it from my son." And she showed him her other knee. She had almost an identical scar on her other knee. It was pretty deep and looked remarkable. And so she asked, "Well, how did it happen?" And then she said that several years ago, or more than several years ago, she had scooped up her toddler, her 2.5-year-old, from the swimming pool and began to walk toward a lounge chair. But as she stepped onto the tiled patio, her foot slipped on the wet, slick surface. She was also 7 months pregnant. It was one of those moments when you feel like you're moving in slow motion and there's nothing you can do to stop the fall. Nothing. So in a split second, she knew that her momentum was going to plunge her right forward. And she had a choice in that split second. She could either fall flat and fall on top of both of her children, her born and her unborn child, or she could fall on her knees. So, of course, in that split-second moment of love, where love really exists in the split second, almost in the eternal moment, she chose to fall on her knees, directly on the unforgiving concrete. Her knees immediately burst open as they hit, and blood spent everywhere. She needed surgery, and then another surgery, stitches. Of course, all this resulted in scars. But her son and her unborn child were unhurt, completely protected. And Cindy Brown would write, and I quote, because she says it best, she says, every time I tell this story, I can't help but tear up because it serves as a small example of the immense love and sacrifice that Jesus Christ has for you and for me. You see, we're all the children of God for whom Jesus took the fall, and not just on his knees, his entire body. Christ suffered on the cross and endured imaginable pain for all of us. His is the greatest scar story ever told. On Friday afternoon, I was having a conversation with a very close friend of mine, and we were talking about today. He asked me, "What's the gospel this weekend, Monsignor?" And I told him exactly what you just heard, and I'm sure they'll hear it when they come. And I began to express what you heard a few minutes ago. And as I began to tell it, perhaps in a more dramatic way, he had the shakes. And I said, what's going on? He said, if Jesus appeared to me right now, and asked me to put my finger in the hole in his arm, in his hand, and my hand up that gaping wound that they split to burst his heart, I think I would pass out. And the more I thought about that statement, the more true and telling it is. My brothers and sisters, why would Jesus ask Thomas to do something so eerie, so creepy almost? Put your finger in the hole that they left me. Put your hand in that gaping wound so you can see my heart beating. And here lies the mystery of the second Sunday of Easter. Why would he do it? He still does it. He still does this with us, my friends. In this society, the number one clear message of the world is, don't hurt. Don't embrace pain. Run away from it. And every night and every day in our city, in our world, people are running to places where they can try to forget about how they hurt, or how lonely they are, or how anxious they are, or the mistakes and shameful things that are going on in life. Because the world says, medicate your pain, cushion your anxiety, flood your life with meaningless relationships to comfort the loneliness. And guess what? It's still there. It's still there. And the world knows that. Just like the man or woman who is addicted to gambling, they may win something, but it's never enough. And they keep at it and keep at it and keep at it until the hole still is larger and larger. Why would he do this? Because this is the only way to live. This is the only way to make sense of life. My friends, nobody gets out of life without scars. The longer you and I live, the more scars we amass. Physical scars, emotional scars, painful scars. Yes, open wounds that Christ can see. And yet, he doesn't cover them up. He doesn't fill them up. He exposes them. And look what happened to Jesus. When he lifted up his pain and his anxiety and his worry and all the things that make life so hard, he was raised up. And yet he still had the signs on him. This is the message for all of us today. This is the message that he gives not only to Thomas. Now, Thomas gets a bum rap because in circles now, when talking about Thomas, everyone's saying the doubting Thomas, the doubting Thomas. But Thomas was not the only thing he did was doubt. He proclaimed, my Lord and my God, you are my Lord and my God. You have shown us how to die, and you have shown us how to live. And he's shown us something else too. Our life is not without doubt. Our life is not without doubt. Thomas is interesting because in John's gospel, about 6 or 7 times, John keeps saying Thomas Didymus, the twin, and Thomas Didymus, the twin. It's almost as if he's trying to make some kind of comment. Twin, whose twin? Whose twin is he? Now, some have posited that maybe he was Judas's twin because they want to make mention about Judas and what he had done to Jesus, but that doesn't make sense because Judas is still mentioned. If you're not going to mention who the twin, you're not going to mention Judas either, and they do. Or maybe someone else. But some theologians have posited that because Thomas doubted, because Thomas wanted proof, because Thomas wasn't where he was supposed to be the first time, that Thomas's twin is us. That we are his twin. How many times have you and I heard, where were you? Where were you? Why weren't you where you were supposed to be? Or, do you doubt? Do you really doubt? So Thomas for us is someone to remind us why we must reflect and hang on and embrace our own pain, our own anxiety, And when he says, my Lord and my God, he was also recipient of the first Mass. He received the body and blood of Christ. And what does that tell us today? My brothers and sisters, all of us, be grateful today, those of us ready and prepared to receive Jesus in the Eucharist, because the more intimate we become with Jesus in the Eucharist, the more we reflect on who are we receiving, the more we search, the more we find, and the more we love him in each other. We look for him in each other. And of course, to different degrees. This is, of course, in friendship. The book of Sirach says, the person who finds a faithful friend finds a treasure. A treasure. Because then we become more like God. We become more loving. And yes, there is also doubt. Doubt occurs on all levels. It does affect our faith. Everybody here at some point in our life may have had some doubt about our belief. Are you still there, God? Why don't you talk to me? Where are you? This is natural. This is very normal. We also have doubt about our family. We sometimes doubt our family. Did you really say that? Did you really do that? Did you really go behind my back? Did you really say that? And of course, our friends. Among us, there are many people who are very disappointed that the people we thought we knew, we didn't. And their real self appeared in the darkness. But even Jesus, he began in chapter 6 of John's Gospel to talk about the Eucharist. And people began to leave. They left him. Oh, they were ready for the free food and the free tricks and all the miracles, but when he talked about his own body and blood, they started leaving. And what did Jesus turn to his apostles? What did he say to them? Are you going to leave me too? Are you going to leave me? My friends, these things are very important because they affect our lives. Not too long ago, a young couple that we married here about maybe 2 years ago, it was interesting because for some reason, when she was younger, she was involved in a car accident, so she was afraid to drive. She was already 22 and she didn't have a driver's license. And, she's going to have to drive eventually. And so her fiancé taught her how to drive, and she got her driver's license right before she got her marriage license. And but she was always very squeamish. And I guess her young husband knew. And so one day, probably 2 years, maybe a year and a half later, she had an accident. And she wasn't hurt, but she was very shaken up, and the policeman came over to her and says, "Where's your insurance?" And she remembered that her husband told her, "It's in the glove compartment. It's in the glove compartment." So she reached over, and this big envelope that said insurance, big letters. She said, "I think this is it. It says insurance." And the policeman said, "Yes, ma'am, this is it." And he opened the envelope, and I think the policeman was a little bit touched because he asked her, "Is your husband's name David?" And she said, "Yes, how did you know?" Because there's a note in here. She said, "Remember, it's you I love, not the car." He knew she was going to need that. So she wouldn't doubt. And then yesterday afternoon, a couple in their late 20s, on their second child, just bought a home about 2 years ago. man called and came by. He lost his job. And he was very worried. And he was very frightened. And we talked, and I said, you got to go tell her. Just go tell her. Sit down with her. Hold hands. Remember your vows in good times and in bad, in sickness and in health. And he started to cry because he was very, very nervous and very upset. I said, just go. Will you go with me, Monsignor? No, I'm not going with you. No, go. Just go. He called me an hour later that he got there and he asked her to sit down. And she was very worried. And he said, I lost my job. I think we'll be all right. But I'm afraid. And she said to him, but you didn't lose me. Remember our vows. I didn't call her. I didn't tell her to say that. But see, doubt is part of life. And how does Jesus appeal to that? Peace be with you. Peace be with you. My friends, do not be misled. Everybody suffers in life. The difference is how we suffer. Look upon Jesus. He took his wounds and lifted them to Christ, to God, his Father. And he was raised up. That's the message today. Embrace your pain. Accept who you are. Love who you are. And offer what you could be to God. And if you do this, you will finally understand what it means when Jesus says, peace be with you.